on the mountain, in the valley, in the crowded streets, or the empty desert, in our hope and in our waiting, we are never alone. God is with us.
Snyder, and I am in Siem Reap, Cambodia, working with Rafa International, and been here for about 12 years. My very first few years when I was new here and just trying to figure everything out. And one of the hardest things of that first season was figuring out how to be the person who has resources or access to resources in a place where everybody's in such great need. Over the course of a couple years, there were some hard times there. People's needs are great and they were really complex, and I was just one person with actually some resources but not that much. And I'm a softie and I didn't know how to say no, and I didn't know how to have good boundaries or good parameters for making good decisions about helping people, and their problems are much more complex than I really could have helped. I mean, I just got myself in deep and created situations where people were dependent on me, and I loaned out hundreds of dollars that I never saw back, and I felt taken advantage of sometimes. And to be honest, over the course of probably the whole couple of years, it got to almost feeling kind of suffocating sometimes. And there were times where it felt really lonely. I felt like I was alone trying to solve these big problems, and I was really kind of figuring it out myself. I didn't have a team. Definitely felt discouraged sometimes. I felt hurt sometimes when I did feel like I was being taken advantage of, and felt hurt by that. I'm telling you, sometimes I would get to where I'd cringe when the phone rang, because my initial thought was someone's calling me and they're going to ask for something else, and I just feel kind of, again, suffocated. Good things happened out of that time. I know the Lord was there with me and he was guiding me and he led me into those situations, I know, but it was hard real life lessons about how to do that by doing it the wrong way first. That point in particular of learning how to kind of help people in need, those hard experiences early on, really helped in what I do every day now with Rafa, because a huge part of our ministry, and a really important part of it, is when the girls have received healing, they've been safe, and then we're walking them out to life, beyond Rafa. And a huge part of that is wanting them to live a sustainable future in freedom and safety. And so it's not just helped or impacted how we approach individual situations, but even the whole systems that we've created. How I've learned how to ask better questions and look at the bigger picture, the bigger context of how to help in more long-term development that leads to better life in the future.
Well, I am so grateful that you were willing to endure the wilderness. It's really an incredible honor for us as a church. And right now I'm speaking for all of us who are watching right now, all of Carterville Christian Church. We love you. We're so grateful for you. And when you feel alone or you feel isolated, just know that there's a church in Southwest Missouri that is praying for you and loves you very much.
Thank you. And I'll take this opportunity to thank you guys for your part in the success stories that we're seeing, because you're very much a part of what's happening here, and really appreciate and love you guys too.
Hey, Merry Christmas to you, Jenny. Why don't you give us a come on, Merry Christmas.
Recreate Bon Noel.
Yes, Merry Christmas. Thank you, Jenny.
Thanks, Damien. Bye, everybody.
Well, would you express your appreciation to our global outreach partner, Jenny Snyder? She's amazing. And good morning to you all, and Merry Christmas. Go ahead and look at the person next to you or behind you or in front of you and wish them a Merry Christmas this morning. As Kristen mentioned, today is day 8 of our 20 days of Christmas here at C3. It was an opportunity for you to dress up in your Christmas gear, your Christmas swag. Some of you got that memo, others of you didn't, or you just ignored it. I don't know which one it is. I kind of tried to ignore it, but my wife, who accuses me of being a bit of a Scrooge, wouldn't let me get out of it that easily. Thus, the ornament necklace that you see. Right? We share this together. I thought maybe this would be distracting during the sermon. This would definitely be distracting during the sermon. I thought, well, maybe I'll just do this. But then Keith Bell, who's our tech minister, he is definitely a Scrooge, and he said, no lights, not allowed to do it. So here we are. This is all you get. Today we want to talk about God's presence with us in the wilderness. It's a common motif and theme found throughout Scripture, God's people wandering in the wilderness. Isaiah talks about it. Kristen referenced the book of Isaiah. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. What an incredible promise that is for all of us, whatever it is that you're going through right now. I'm making a way in the wilderness, creating living water in the wasteland. That's what we want to talk about. Now, admittedly, I have not spent much time in the physical wilderness. Maybe that's no surprise to you. I don't know, but that's not been a place that I have frequented very often. I've been camping a number of times. The first time that I went camping was with my father. When I was a kid, he took me to Huntington State Park, which is a beautiful state park just south of Myrtle Beach, which is my hometown in South Carolina. And it's this beautiful pine tree forest on the Atlantic Ocean, and it's really rough in it when you camp there, right? And we're in this pine tree forest, and we have our campsite set up, and he loved to fish, and so he woke up early the next morning, and he did some surf fishing, and he caught our breakfast, and we cooked it over an open fire. It's one of my favorite memories with my father, who passed away when I was 16 years old, which is a story I'll talk a little bit more about later. The wilderness, for many people, is an important place. It's an important place for my wife's family. Stacy has 3 brothers. 2 of them are avid hunters. If it moves, they'll shoot it. They'll hunt it, right? And now they'll be quick to tell you that only if it's in season and if they have a license, they're ethical hunters, but they love to hunt. They've been hunting for decades. So I asked them to think about it a little bit and list out all of the things that they have hunted over the years, over the decades. Here's the list. They have hunted squirrel, rabbit, pheasant, quail, grouse. Does anybody know what a grouse is? Does anybody know what that is? Okay, here's a picture of a grouse. It's just a bird. There it is. I didn't know what it was. Had to look it up. Grouse. Duck, goose, woodcock, dove, coyote. That seems dangerous. I don't know. White-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, moose, bear, raccoon, beaver. That does not seem legal. I don't know. Mink, fox, antelope, that seems challenging. Bobcat, and they are from the great state of Arkansas, so they're big Razorback fans. So most importantly, they have hunted wild boar, which is what a Razorback is. My wife would love it right now if we would call the hogs. So here we go. Just kidding. We're not going to do that. For them, there's always something in season. But once a year, on opening weekend, it is a sacred time for the Montgomery family. The brothers, the sons, the daughters, their father's father before him withdraw to a place deep in the west central Arkansas woods, away from cell phone signals, traffic, no sign of civilization, a place where the deer run wild and the coyotes howl at night, and they experience deer camp. I've been a few times. They've been doing this since 1978. I've been a few times since then. We have photographic evidence of me at deer camp. There I am on the left. My son Haddon is kind of tucked in the middle there. Admittedly, while they hunt, I read, but I'm there, okay? I'm there. But it's really not so much about the hunting. It's about the distance, the silence, the separation. But the wilderness is not an easy place to find ourselves. How many of you have heard of Bear Grylls? Does that name mean anything to you? I love Bear Grylls back in the day. There's a picture of him. He's Australian, has a cool accent. He's kind of a self-proclaimed survivalist, had this reality show called Man vs. Wild, and I like to watch it. I love watching it. The basic premise of the show is that Bear is dropped into the wilderness, like a frozen tundra or a desert or a forest somewhere, and he's just got a handful of items, and he has to survive all of the elements, oftentimes staying overnight, until he can find his way out back into civilization, out of the wilderness, back into civilization. I thought it was a great show. I loved it. It came upon a little controversy, though. It turns out that they were conveniently placing props for Bear to find that would help him endure the dark, cold nights. That was kind of bad in itself. But what really condemned the show was when it was discovered, at least in one episode, probably more, that they were lifting Bear up out of the wilderness, where he was staying at a nearby hotel, enjoying a warm shower, comfortable bed, where he was dropped back into the wilderness just in time for the cameras to roll. But listen, no judgment here, all right? I don't blame him one bit. It's exactly what I would have done as well, because the wilderness is a difficult place to find ourselves. And of course, this morning when I talk about the wilderness, I'm talking about those times in our life when we feel alone. We feel the loneliness and the difficulty and the burden of life, when the trees are so tall and the path is so uncertain and unclear, and the sun is scorching and the wind is brutal. And we just are not sure about what the next move should be, what the future holds, which direction we should turn. We've all found ourselves in the wilderness for short periods of time, sometimes for long periods of time, and we feel that insecurity and that anxiousness. I mean, some of you right now are in some type of a wilderness. Your job, your finances, your marriage, your relationships, the future, shame, regret, addiction. Whatever the reason, you feel lost and disoriented. Well, if that's where you are, please know this morning that you are not alone. There is a long list of people in the Bible who have experienced the wilderness. Let's take a look at a few of them. The Israelites, for example, probably most famously found themselves in the wilderness for 40 years. Why were they there? Numbers 32, it's because the Lord's anger was aroused against them that day, and he swore an oath, because they have not followed me wholeheartedly. Not one of these who are 20 years or older, when they came up out of Egypt, will see the land I promised an oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not one except Caleb and Joshua, for they followed the Lord wholeheartedly. But the Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years until the whole generation had passed away. Why? Because they had seen the miraculous hand of God delivering them out of Egypt, and now they doubted, and they feared, and they did not trust that the Lord would deliver them once again. And so their wilderness was their own making. It was their own doing. And sometimes our wilderness is because of the choices that we make, the position we put ourselves in, our own guilt, our own shame, our own regret, and we feel that separation. It's like when you're a kid, those dreaded 4 words that your parents say to you, go to your room, right? And let me tell you, I was a rotten kid. I heard it a lot from my parents. Damien, go to your room. Whenever I would disobey them, whenever I would pick on my sisters, whenever I would not do my chores, bring a bad grade home. Go to your room, Damien, go to your room. Sometimes they'd say, go to your room, and I'd say, why? And they'd say, I don't know, just no reason, just go to your room. Sin separates. Sin separates us from the Lord. Sin separates us from one another. It separates us from being the person that God created us to be. But the Lord restores. And if you're in the wilderness right now because of your own choices, because of your own decisions, then know that the Lord will meet you right where you are. He will forgive you in your repentance. If you cry out to him, he will restore you and fill you with his presence. The Israelites found themselves in the wilderness. King David The great King David found himself in the wilderness on multiple occasions. In fact, the first time we meet King David, guess where he is? He's out in the wilderness, taking care of the sheep, not even being considered to be the next king of Israel because he's out all alone in the wild, taking care of the family business. But when he is selected, anointed to be the next king of Israel, and Saul's jealousy rages against him, David is once again thrust back into the wilderness where God protects him. And we read in 1 Samuel 23, David stayed in the wilderness strongholds and in the hills. Day after day, Saul searched for him, but God did not give David into his hands. For David, the wilderness was a place of protection. He may not have enjoyed it at the time, but God was using it to shape him and to form him. And it was in the wilderness that David wrote these words, "You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water." Nobody wants to be in that kind of wilderness, but sometimes it's only in that place that we can really speak those words of longing for God. It's only when everything has been stripped away, when we have no place to turn, when our wisdom has failed us, that we can cry out, "God, I need you. I seek you. I long for you. Lord, fill me with your presence." The Israelites, David, Elijah, the prophet, found himself in the wilderness after an Academy Award-winning performance on top of Mount Carmel, where he calls down fire from heaven to consume the altars of Baal. Now he finds himself running for his life when King Jezebel puts him in her crosshairs. All that courage, all that boldness on Mount Carmel is dissipated, and he's fleeing into the wilderness for his life. But there in the wilderness, God would make his presence known to Elijah. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart, shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard the gentle whisper of the Lord, he pulled his cloak over his face and he went out and he stood at the mouth of the cave. Here's what we learn from the Israelites, from David, from Elijah. When God shows up, the wilderness is transformed. It's transformed from a place of desolation to a place of preparation. God not only makes his presence known to us as we walk through the wilderness, he not only walks with us in those times of uncertainty, but even if we can't see it, even if we can't understand it, God is able to use those moments of loneliness and disorientation for a greater purpose beyond ourselves. Because it's in the wilderness that we are forced to slow down and to fully depend upon and rely upon the Lord, to be reminded that we are not doing this thing called life alone. There's a book that was written in 1979 by a Japanese theologian entitled 3 Mile an Hour God. 3 Mile an Hour God. In the book, the author observes that humans walk at an average pace of 3 miles per hour. And so it's the conclusion of this author that that's the pace at which God walks. Because God walks not ahead of us, not behind us, but he walks with us. Here's what he writes. Love has its speed. It is a spiritual speed. It is a different kind of speed from the technological speed to which we are accustomed. It goes on in the depth of our life, whether we notice or not, at 3 miles an hour. It is the speed we walk, and therefore the speed the love of God walks. As the old hymn goes, that happened to be my wife's grandmother's favorite hymn, sung at her funeral by her grandson, and he walks with me and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. God walks with us in the wilderness, and not only does he walk with us, encouraging us along the way, making his presence known to us, but he transforms the wilderness from a place of desolation to preparation. He uses those moments and those experiences in ways that we can't perceive to prepare us for the good work that he has in store for us, ahead of us. There have been a number of times in my life that I've found myself walking in the wilderness. Probably most early was when I was a brand new Christian. I became a Christian at the end of my junior year of high school, the beginning of my senior year of high school. My father let us know, announced something that we already knew to be true, that he had a terrible problem with alcohol. He was an alcoholic. And so for several months, we found ourselves in and out of AA meetings and family meetings and therapy sessions, trying to help him through his alcoholism. And he would have some moments of success, but lots of moments of failure, and the failure started to mount. And so my mother and father separated. He was living in an apartment down the road from us. It was Christmas Eve. We were gathered together, my mom, my two younger sisters, me, at my aunt's house. He was alone by himself. We got a phone call letting us know that my father, in kind of a moment of anguish and depression, had attempted to take his own life, but failed. At the very last moment, he pulled the device away, and he survived, fortunately. He was sent to a rehabilitation facility. He was in the Air Force at the time. It was down at an Air Force base in Alabama. And so he was sent down to Alabama to this rehab center. And he was there for several months. We were separated from one another for several months until after some time, the whole family got on a military plane and flew down to Alabama to be with him and to go through some sessions together. And it was a very emotional, difficult several days that we were experiencing together at this rehab facility. But here's what I remember most. In those few days, I was able to sneak away from the family. We were on an Air Force base, so I was able to walk to a bowling alley. And I like to bowl, but I'm a terrible bowler. I don't know if some of you are good bowlers. I'm terrible at it. But I'm by myself at this bowling alley. Literally, it's just the teenager behind the counter and me. And I'm bowling this game, and it's going really well. I'm like mowing him down. I don't know. It was like I was possessed or something. My best game up to that point was like a 105 or a 110, right? On that day, that game, I bowled like a 210. Now, some of you who are big-time bowlers are like, well, that's average. But for me, it was amazing. Like, this was the best game I had ever bowled up to that point or since that point, and I'm all alone. I'm like looking around. Have you ever had those moments where you do something great and you look around and there's nobody to witness it? You know, that's what it was like for me. Like, I can't believe this. This is amazing. Look at what I've done here. Nobody could see it. Nobody could observe it. So that happened. We're done with the therapy sessions, go back home. He continues to have limited success fighting his alcoholism. Eventually, he has a serious medical condition. I'm at school. It's just a few days before my high school graduation. I get a phone call from the hospital. His pancreas has ruptured. He's gone septic. 3 days later, he passed away. This was 2 days before my high school graduation. So that was obviously a very devastating time. We have the funeral. Several weeks go by, and I have some friends who invite me to go to an amusement park with them. Now, I don't like amusement parks, right? I'm a real grouch, okay? I don't like a real Grinch, right? I don't like amusement parks. And I really didn't want to go with them to this amusement park, right? For two reasons. One, the obvious reason, my dad has just passed away. That doesn't sound like very much fun. I don't want to go to an amusement park. I'm still kind of figuring things out. But the other reason I don't like amusement parks is because roller coasters make me sick. Like, they make me nauseous. Like, anybody with me on this? Like, I can't even, when I look at a roller coaster, I get a little queasy in the stomach. Like, I don't like roller coasters. Why do I want to go to a place filled with roller coasters that I can't ride? It doesn't sound very much fun to me, but they were insistent that I go with them to this amusement park in North Carolina. So we go, and it's kind of quiet there, not a lot of people there. We go to a roller coaster, peer pressure, they talk me into it. I get on that roller coaster. Normally that would be a terrible idea, but for whatever reason, on that day, I didn't feel sick at all. It was actually fun. And we got off the roller coaster, and we rode another roller coaster, and another one after that. For 8 hours straight, We rode roller coasters, and I felt perfectly fine the entire day. It's never happened, ever, before or after. Now listen, church. I do not stand up here and I'm not going to presume to know the ways of God. I don't know if that was like God's arm bowling that game, that amazing game in that bowling alley. And I don't know that it was some supernatural, miraculous intervention of the Lord that I did not throw up on everybody on that day in that amusement park. I don't know. Here's what I know. God was with this young believer who was struggling, questioning his faith, trying to decide if this was really worth it. Why would God allow these things to be happening to me after just giving my life to him? All I know is that God was with me in my wilderness, a gentle whisper that came in the form of a bowling alley and a roller coaster, making his presence known to me. And not only was God making himself known to me in my wilderness, but I can now see that God was using those moments and those experiences to prepare me for ministry to come. What was true for me is true for you, and it was true for Jesus. Though being in very nature God, he did not consider equality with God something to be held on to, but he emptied himself and he took on human flesh. He became one of us. Earth was his wilderness. And it was not an easy journey for Jesus, not even starting out. Mary and Joseph traveling 70 miles to Bethlehem, ending up in a cave filled with animals and dung and a feeding trough for a crib. I remember hearing the story of a church that put on a nativity story, a nativity play, and the preacher's son wanted to be Joseph, but he was cast as the innkeeper, which was a role that he felt was beneath his stature as the preacher's son. And so he decided to sabotage the play. And at the moment in the story when Joseph and Mary arrive in Bethlehem, they go to the inn. Joseph says, "Sir, do you have any room in the inn?" The innkeeper says, "Sure. Come right on in. We've got plenty of room," right? Which is, of course, not how the story goes. But Joseph, who is quick on his feet, sticks his head in the door, looks around and says, "This place is a dump. Come on, Mary, we're going to the stable." A stable. That's where the Messiah, the Savior of the world, was born. Jesus was born in the wilderness. And just when the Holy Family was settling down into Bethlehem, starting a new job, a new home, a new life together, they receive a warning, a dream from the Lord to flee under threat of death from King Herod. And so once again, we see the Holy Family in the wilderness, this time a 40-mile journey south into the desert of Egypt. The historian Plutarch writes in 155 BC that Roman soldiers making the same trip into Egypt were, quote, more fearful of the hardships to be faced in the desert than of the battles to be fought ahead. And yet they traveled into the desert to live among strangers in the shadows of the idols, uncertain of when or if they would ever be able to return back home. Jesus was born in the wilderness, and so it should come as no surprise to us that 30 years later, when Jesus started his earthly ministry, he would be driven into the wilderness for 40 days and for 40 nights, no food, no water. And yet we read at the end of that experience that the Lord's messengers took care of Jesus, just as the Lord will take care of us. The Lord showed up in the wilderness, and he turned that wilderness into a place of preparation for the work that was to come. The wilderness prepared Jesus for the garden where he would sweat drops of blood and proclaim, "Lord, not my will, but yours be done." The wilderness would prepare Jesus for the mockings and the beatings and the flogging. The wilderness would prepare Jesus to hang on the cross between common criminals, between heaven and earth, exposed for all the world to see. The wilderness would prepare Jesus to do what needed to be done for you and for me. The wilderness prepared Jesus to endure the cross, scorning its shame, until finally finally he could rest at the right hand of the Father in heaven. Can you imagine that reunion? What must that have been like for Jesus and his Father? That day when Jesus had finally done what he needed to do and he returns into the presence of his Father. I wonder, did the Father say to his Son, "Son, welcome home. You did it. You did it, son. Welcome home." And did Jesus say in reply, "But I did not do it alone." And neither do we. Neither do we. And so we sing, heaven is all around. Jesus is near. I can see it now. I can see it now. Your kingdom is here. If you are ready to walk with Jesus, maybe for the first time, we want to invite you to do so. We had a baptism last night for our high school retreat. It was an awesome celebration. We had a baptism during first service, and it was a great celebration. We can do that again this service as well. If you've never made that decision to walk with Jesus, he is inviting you right now. He's inviting you to join him in the journey through this life, through this wilderness. Will you accept the invitation to be baptized, to put your faith in Christ today? And if you've already made that decision, but you feel like you're wandering in your own wilderness, we want to love you. We want to encourage you. We want to pray for you. We'll have people in the back. We'll have people up front. We'd love to pray a word of encouragement over you if that's what you need this morning. But for all of us, let's stand and let's declare that Jesus is here in this place.